So Judge Belz was born and raised right here in Orange County and is a proud graduate of Servite High School. He's also a graduate of Pepperdine Law School and has spent 32 years as a trial lawyer here in Orange County before being appointed to the Superior Court. He was appointed in 2009 and at the Orange County Superior Court served in family and probate law, including as the trial judge for complex probate and trust cases. He retired in 2024 from the judiciary and now works as a private judge with Judicate West, where he handles mediation and arbitration of trust, family, and personal injury matters. Very important to all of us in this room, Judge Belz is a co-founder and past president of the St. Thomas More Society of Orange County and serves on the board of directors for the Shroud Center of Southern California. He's spoken extensively on the Shroud of Turin at the center, as well as at schools and churches throughout Southern California. He presents the historical and scientific evidence for its authenticity. Please join me in welcoming Judge Belz.
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate that very much, and I am very excited to be here with all of you. Obviously, you are either Shroudies now or you will become Shroudies soon, okay? So this may be your introductory process, but let me tell you something. This thing is remarkable, and what I'm hoping we can do tonight is activate some curiosity, because it's curiosity that brought me into the Shroud and resulted in my being involved with the Shroud for the last 12 years at the Santiago Retreat Center. So let's do it and see what we can talk about, okay? First of all, the Shroud Center of Southern California was founded by Dr. August Aceta in 1992, and Dr. Aceta, like me, was curious. He wanted to know more, and he did his own analysis of the Shroud when he was in medical school, which led him ultimately to form the Shroud Center of Southern California. That was in an office building in Fountain Valley with his brother Alex for many years until 2014, when he had to move his medical practice to Bakersfield, and we stepped in. We being Lee Sweeney, who's here, the lead docent and the executive director, we stepped in and we found a new home for it at Santiago Retreat Center. So we've been there doing hundreds and hundreds of presentations, mostly to kids, over the last 11 to 12 years, okay? And by the way, what we have there is spectacular. It's really, really good. So definitely, if you have an opportunity to go out there and see the Shroud as it's presented out there, you will not regret it, okay? I need to give some credits. First of all, I need to give credits to Lee Sweeney because most of these slides are his, because he's a master at this, and so I kind of typed his slides to put them together, to put together a slide presentation that's a little different and unique. And then also Dr. Aceta, Father Spitzer, Emanuela Marinelli, and some additional articles. Academia.com is a place, if you want to find articles on the Shroud, I must have 100. And that's a really important study there that I used in the presentation. So what are we doing here today? We're going to talk about the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That by which we would swear in the witnesses when I was beginning a trial as a judge and also as a lawyer. Why is this important? Because we're going to approach this a little bit differently. There's basically three disciplines that can be relevant to the Shroud. Obviously science, obviously faith, but I think more significantly, the law and the way we understand proof of fact and jurisprudence. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about science and faith, but I want to redirect the focus today as if we were in trial and we were putting the case on using the principles that we use for proof of fact and jurisprudence in our country, which, by the way, is the best in the world. So the Shroud of Turin is not exclusive to science. Unfortunately, science has kind of dominated the conversation with the Shroud over the years. It's resulted in so many studies. But the science of the Shroud is not the only way to understand the Shroud. Unfortunately, in this culture, we believe that science kind of has the last word in just about everything, but it really doesn't, because science tests, it creates a hypothesis, it tests, and maybe it gives us an answer and maybe it doesn't give an answer. A perfect example is the carbon dating, the 1988 carbon dating, which I'm not going to spend time on because that's a whole nother topic. That carbon dating was not accurate because they didn't provide all of the data that was available to them. And we were told, matter-of-factly, that it was a 13th century forgery. Okay, well, it has since been debunked. And that study and that science misled, including Father Spitzer, for decades. So this is a great little book, A Catholic Science Champions the Shroud of Turin. And this is a book where he basically says science does not have the last word. There's so much that science can do for us, but there's also so much that science cannot do for us. I threw this one in there because this is something that caught my attention recently. If you know anything about who Nikola Tesla was, he was this amazing, intelligent metaphysicist, right? Well, this is a quote from him that I thought was really relevant when he said, "The day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in 1 decade than all the previous centuries of its existence." So what was he saying? He was saying is, science limits itself to the study of natural phenomenon. When it gets to supernatural phenomenon, it doesn't know how to deal with it. It doesn't know how to approach. Up until about 1837, science, or people who called themselves involved in science, would study both supernatural and natural. Then they stopped it, and science since then has limited itself just to natural phenomenon, which is unfortunate because we're going to show you where maybe the things beyond nature are even more fascinating and more important. It appears as if Nikola Tesla saw that when he looked into the cosmos and saw what he saw out there in the universe. The life of the law has not been logic, it has been experience. Oliver Wendell Holmes. What's he saying? The law is based on rules, evidence, human reasoning, and experience. That's how these jury trials are handled. We instruct the juries with jury instructions, which are rules. We give them relevant evidence, reliable evidence. They have to use, I just tell the jurors, you guys have to decide, you listen to the story, you decide what the story is and what the truth is after you hear both sides. That's what we do as jurors. Our legal system is not infallible, but it's pretty darn good, at least from my experience, from all the times that I've spent in jury trials, which is about the first year of a judge I was doing jury trials. Legal truth versus metaphysical truth. Here's kind of where these two lines start to kind of touch but not touch. They connect and they don't connect. Legal proof is human. It's practical. It's based on admissible evidence and reasoned probability. Reasoned probability. Metaphysical proof is philosophical in the sense that it seeks truth that is certain in all possible worlds, okay? I'm going to talk about the shroud from the perspective of evidence, and what the evidence clearly shows is the probability of what it is, okay? But I think it's really important because theology and philosophy are different, that they connect with faith. We're now going to be talking about the shroud today from the perspective of what's the legal evidence for the shroud, okay? And I think you're going to agree with me, it's pretty amazingly strong, okay? I'd try this case every single day. It's a great case, okay? The Shroud of Turin is unique in that it is physical. It's a physical object. Well, our faith is based on scripture, teachings, doctrine, dogma, theories, philosophy, okay? Which tells us and leads us to understand who God is. This particular object kind of gets in the way of that, in a sense, because it's a physical object. But that physical object has an ability to connect with just about everything else that's part of the theology, the doctrine, and the dogmas that the church teaches us and has taught us for years, for centuries. And that is that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and He rose from the dead. We take that for granted. Say that. He rose from the dead. That doesn't make any sense, does it? From a purely natural human phenomenon, He rose from the dead, okay? Well, we're going to give you a little bit more to understand the reality of that as we move through this PowerPoint. So in evidence, we talk about direct and indirect evidence. And I've used this jury instruction so many times when I was a lawyer. I did criminal work in my early years, and then I did civil trial work for 27 years, tried a lot of cases, a lot of different cases. And we used to explain to the jurors, indirect evidence or circumstantial evidence can have the same weight as direct evidence, okay? With a shroud, there's both direct and circumstantial evidence. So keep that in mind as we're moving through all of the details as I explain to you what the evidence is for the shroud's authenticity. The burden of proof. Basically, it's preponderance of the evidence. What is that? That it's more likely than not. That's the jury instruction 200 that jurors use in civil cases, more likely than not. Obviously, in criminal cases, they use beyond a reasonable doubt. But there's another standard that I think even applies here, and that's clear and convincing proof, jury instruction 201. Certain facts must be proved by clear and convincing evidence, which is a higher burden of proof. This means that the party must persuade you that it is highly probable that the fact is true, okay? So we go from likely that it's true to highly probable that it's true, okay? In court, in trial, it's really important, if you're a trial lawyer, that you're corroborating your evidence. It's not just one piece of evidence, it's more than one piece of evidence. You want to put as much evidence as you can that's relevant to what you're trying to convince the jury or the court to understand about your case. So corroborating evidence is really important, okay? It's not singular. It grows and it expands the picture and the understanding of what the truth of the fact is that you're trying to convince the jury to understand. So we use corroborating evidence, which there is a ton of it with a shroud, okay? And then this is another really important legal principle, the totality of the evidence. How many times would I use this in trial? How many times would I talk to the lawyers when I was a bench trial officer doing those long cause trust trials? The totality of the evidence. What's the totality of it? It's not just one thing. It's not just this thing or that thing. One of the realities of the shroud is science has just studied this thing and studied and studied and studied it. And they do these tests. They still haven't figured it out, but they come up with these little theories and they say, well, if it's possible that the blood really isn't blood, human blood, it could be animal blood. Well, anything's possible, okay? But you can't look at one little piece of evidence, you have to look at the totality of the evidence. So we're going to be talking about the totality, but this is a really important legal principle for those of you that are not lawyers. Obviously, for those of you that are, you understand what I'm talking about. It's the totality of the evidence, right? So, what is the shroud and where did it come from? Let's move into that. Well, it's currently held in St. John the Baptist Cathedral in Turin, Italy, okay? And it has been there since 1578, at least that's one of the earliest records. But in 1982, King Umbart III, whose family literally owned the shroud. There's many people that think, well, it's always been Catholic Church. No. The Savoy family owned it for hundreds of years. This is a whole nother story, which we'll touch on, but I can't cover all of it, okay? He gave it to the Pope, to Pope John Paul II on May 14th, 1982. This is something that a lot of people didn't know, okay? It's not, I've heard this so many times, it's Catholic. It is not Catholic. There's nowhere on the shroud that it says Catholic. But we get this all the time. There's this bias, right? And it's too bad because it's for every human person to understand what this thing is trying to tell us, okay? So what is it? It's this 14-foot by 3.5-foot piece of linen cloth, okay? High quality. The weave on it is, do you know? Anybody know what the weave is? Herringbone. What is herringbone weave called? What is herringbone weave called? It's called the 3-in-1 weave. Yeah, right? Nothing's by accident. The 3-in-1 weave, okay? And it's a weave that goes way back to the 1st century, and that's been studied and it's been confirmed. There are people that say, well, there's evidence that they didn't have that back then. There's evidence that they did, okay? So anyway, it's got this image on it, okay? By the way, the noise from fires and probably from being folded and held in a place for a long time. So there's a lot of markings on it. They've cleaned a lot of those markings up, by the way. It's been cleaned up, at least 10 years ago. They cleaned it, and they took some of those patches away, and now some of these markings are not there. But anyway, that's what it is, okay? So it's a photographic negative. This is a photographic negative, okay, on a first century piece of linen cloth. It's not the product of an artist, and we'll talk about that in a minute. How was the image formed on the cloth? Likely a form of light, okay? And when it's studied by science, it reveals there is a photographic positive image there that you don't see here of a real human body in a state of rigor mortis, post-death. Forensic has confirmed this, with three-dimensional properties, okay? And modern science cannot reproduce it or explain it. Let me say that again. They cannot reproduce it or explain it, okay? And by the way, we are in 2025, right? Interestingly enough, you can see and trace the movement of the shroud from Jerusalem in 33 up to Edessa, to Constantinople, to Liri, France, and Turin. And this is one of Lee Sweeney's slides. It's a great slide because he's basically saying the shroud history matches church growth. Circumstantial evidence of the shroud's presence in Europe in these various places over this period of time. Now keep in mind, one of the issues that we have in terms, and I'm going to go through history, almost, I don't know what the number would be, early Christian literature is gone. We don't have journals or Instagram or records like we have. We have references that we can kind of connect that point by inference, which is a legal standard, circumstantial evidence, okay, we can point to its existence. So let's talk a little bit about the history, and I'm going to move through history quickly because I really want to spend most of my time on science. So we know here, John 20:3-8, they went into the tomb, they saw the burial cloths there, cloths, more than one, two, and they believed. So, why do you think they believed? Because they saw what was on it, and they grabbed it, okay? And they took it with them. We also know that they wrapped his body in a clean linen cloth. That's Matthew 7. So this is the earliest reference to it, okay? Then what did they do with it? I mean, think about this for a second. He had told him these things that he was telling them was going to happen, his apostles. And then he's brutally crucified and murdered. He goes in the tomb, and he said something about 3 days, and 3 days later he's gone. And when they go into the tomb, they find that cloth sitting there, okay? What are you going to do if you're them? Are you going to leave the cloth? Or are you going to take the cloth, right? So they're going to take the cloth, right? Then the question is, what do they do with it? Because they're surrounded by people that don't like this story, right? Jewish authorities as well as Romans, right? So there's some pretty good references that there's a document called the Doctrine of a Die, and it suggests that Jude Thaddeus, one of the apostles, was commissioned to take it up to Edessa, where there was a king that had an open kingdom, and it was a commercial center, and the Romans didn't bother him. His name was Abgar. That's a whole other story, which I'm not going to get into the details, but that's one of the theories that probably, to me, it's one of the strongest theories. There's also indications that it may have gone into Syria, and spent some time in Syria also. So Edessa seems to have some fairly strong references. Edessa is at the corner, at top of Syria, right where the border to Turkey is. It's no longer called Edessa, okay? How about this one? The holy sacrifice of the Mass is to be celebrated on a cloth of linen, consecrated by the bishop, as if it were a clean shroud of Christ. Now, from my perspective, that's evidence that they knew about the shroud, right? Because they wanted it to be used as a linen cloth. Linen, they use linen, right, on the altar, right? There you go. There's an early reference to it, which this is another one of Lee's finds, which is like, whoa, that's crazy, right? And then here's one that caught me one day in Mass. And I know that you could understand what they're saying here in different ways, but when they gave us the Nicene Creed, they were trying to tell us what we believe. Interesting thing is this phrase, God from God, light from light. It just hit me one day in Mass, and I went, whoa, where do they get that? Well, they were speaking to the Arians. Well, they were, bottom line is, light from light is very relevant to what I'm going to show you about the shroud, okay? And again, the early Christians were just like us. They just didn't have computers. They could reason and think and process and understand, right? And when they saw this cloth with this image on it, what do you think they thought they had? An amazing piece of evidence, right? So now we go into the 7th century, and this is called Christ Pantocrator Almighty. This is a really good, if not circumstantial, direct evidence of the knowledge of the shroud, because the image in the icon matches up to the image on the shroud. And it has 150 points of congruence that experts who do facial recognition use that identifies that image with the shroud. You can kind of see it right there. But you can kind of see it right there. So this is another piece of evidence that suggests that they had it, they knew about it, and they had seen it, right? That image. Got it? Moving on. Here's 769. Pope Stephen III, a cloth with an image of our Lord's face and the length of his body, so divinely transformed to see the transfiguration made on the cloth. Key words. 2 words that got my attention was divinely transformed and transfigured. Okay? Transfigured. That's a big word. We're going to talk some more about what transfigured means as it relates to the shroud. And then we have the Praecodex, and this is another one of those icons where we have a record of this image that shows a man in the position of the body in the shroud, and then there's this weave here that has these poker holes that are the same poker holes that are on the shroud. This is another circumstantial, if not direct, evidence of the shroud in 1192, because it shows the same pose, arms crossed, herringbone weave, poker holes, and four fingers with no thumbs. By the way, on the shroud, the finger's like that, okay? Like that, okay? You don't see the thumb. Dr. Aceta will explain to you that the reason for that is when they put the nail through the wrist, not the palm, it hit the ulnar nerve, and that pulled the thumb in, okay? By the way, let me just make this perfectly clear. There's only 2 possibilities for the shroud and where it came from. It was either the product of a human person or it was something supernatural that doesn't have a human-person connection. There is no other option, right? We didn't have AI. We didn't have electricity, okay? There's only those 2 options. It's got to be a human forger or artist, or it's got to be something that comes from God, right? Anybody got a different option? Okay, okay, so you narrow it down, okay? And so this is a really good, to me, from a forensic and an argument standpoint, there's no way that a forger would have thought to do that. Would not have thought to do that, right? Great argument, right? Would this be fun in trial? They have taken many relics, including the linen in which our Lord was wrapped. And there's a whole story about 1204 and the sack of Constantinople, which I'm not going to get into. That's a whole nother story. Scandalous, terrible, but it disappeared. They had it there and it disappeared. And then we do know, and this is kind of where we know 1578, I think I said 14 earlier, it's 1578. We have this picture where we know it was on public display. The important thing about this is if you kind of see what's happening here, they're all holding it on one side. DNA going onto the shroud? Maybe yes, right? Okay. Okay, so let's move along. Again, this another circumstantial piece of evidence. We can see how the shroud moved. We have direct evidence that it was there in Edessa in 544. Then it was moved to Constantinople in 944. Then it was moved to Illyria. Then it was moved to Turin, okay? So we have records of that show as the church grew over the centuries, you could see that the shroud was there. Okay, moving on. Science. This is really where I wanted to go. I wanted to talk about science and the shroud. All we knew about the shroud was it was this 14-foot long piece of linen cloth with this image on it for hundreds and hundreds of years, okay? Until 1898, when an amateur photographer, lawyer, okay, was given permission to take a photograph of the shroud at a shroud exhibition at the cathedral in Turin in the evening with a couple different people. He had this big monster camera, which they have in the museum in Turin. I've seen it. And I don't know, the exposure was like 3 minutes or something. I mean, this long exposure. And he's taking a picture like that, right? And then he gets back to his house and he's got this glass plate that he's going to develop into the picture, right? Until he sees that. And the story goes from his testimony is he almost dropped the plate. Because he took a picture of that, and when he went to develop it, he saw that. So what was it? That. So the cloth with this image had a double side to it. It had a side that we didn't know about until the modern era. The modern era, right? Why is that relevant? Because the modern era is an era that needs proof. Now we have something that's not explainable. Not explainable. See the image over there? See that face? Do you notice anything? Well, let me ask you this. You're looking at the image. By the way, that's an original. We would call it a positive or an original, okay? As in using photographic language and properties. It's not a photograph, but it has photographic properties. On the piece of linen cloth. You notice anything about that that stands out? Say it. His face. Look at his face. We'll give you more insight as we move along, okay? So this is a negative. That's an original. The world's first photograph, 1898. Okay? Moving on. So what happened to this photograph? Secondo thought, whoa, look at this. He took it to his bishop, and his bishop didn't even really want to believe it. He basically accused him of some sort of a trick. Nothing really happened with the shroud for decades after 1898. This is part of the story that's really unusual. Nothing really happened until they re-photographed it in 1931 with this other professional photographer, Giuseppe Henri. Pia was there. He got the satisfaction of having another photographer do the same thing and confirm what he had said. And that is, there's this image here, okay? And that was a great moment for him because he had been kind of ridiculed and not believed for all of those decades, right? And so that's actually the time also when, have you guys heard of this? I read this recently on a plane. A doctor at Calvary. This is one of the great spiritual works. This doctor in the 30s really got into an in-depth study of the shroud. A doctor at Calvary. If you can get that book, trust me, it will catch your attention. And he examined it, and he has some unbelievable language and words and phrases from his description of what. And it's a dense book, but it's a great spiritual classic. Okay, so let's move on. So science, science, science. So decades go by, decades. Okay, now we're in the 30s, now we're in the 70s, right? Until John Jackson, who was a PhD for the Air Force in Colorado Springs with another friend who was also in the Air Force, Eric Chumper, decided they were curious. They had read, by the way, the Doctor at Calvary wasn't published until 1950. Dr. Barbet did his examination in the early 30s. But they had read the book and they were curious, right? And they decided, well, we got this VP8 analyzer. Let's see what happens when we analyze it. It was used to analyze for military purposes, to analyze military sites. So they put the shroud into this analyzer, and what happened was it turned out to be a three-dimensional image. They knew about that image, but when they examined that image in a VP8, it came back with three-dimensional properties. Three-dimensional. On a piece of linen cloth, right?
Or a picture of linen.
They put it in this machine to analyze the image, and when they analyzed it, it came back with that, okay?
They didn't actually have the physical linen. It was
No, just an image, like an image like that, right? Okay, now, you want to know the other part of the story? When they saw this image, there were 3 of them in the room, and they all started jumping up and down screaming. Because they realized they had discovered something remarkable and not understandable with their scientific minds, right? They're all PhDs, okay? And so that resulted in, and here's the three-dimensional properties and qualities, okay? The only way this could have happened is if the body became mechanically transparent. That's a really good word. What's mechanically transparent? Like a spirit. Like a spirit. Okay? When Mary appears in these apparitions, okay, we just got back from Medjugorje. It's happening. When Mary appears in these apparitions, Fatima, Lourdes, how many, right? She's in a different dimension, but she's a spiritual person and they can see her three-dimensionally. That's a reality, okay? Okay, it can't even be debated. She's there and she's talking to us, right? Spiritual, okay? Why is that important? Because it's going to explain the gospel in many ways. So John Jackson and Eric Jumper put together this enormous, this incredible group of scientists to go and do the first study ever of the Shroud of Turin. A 5-day, 120 straight hours, 26 scientists of all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of disciplines, went to Turin to do this examination. They had 2 tons of equipment. They had 5 straight days. Okay? By the way, at that time, the King of Savoy, Umberto, owned the shroud. It wasn't the Pope. It wasn't the Vatican. Right? And so they did their examination, and this is where it really gets fun. The first sentence of the summary from their examination was, there are no pigments, paints, or dyes found on the fibrils. And how do they know that? Because they stretched the shroud out and they ran light through it, spectroscopy light, which is designed to identify a pigment, a paint, a dye, or a stain. Anything that has a nuclear product, a property, like that's got some solidness to it. And when they ran the light through the shroud cloth, the image disappeared. Disappeared. And the color there was no color that soaked through into the fibers, okay? So we conclude for now that the shroud image is that of a real human form of a scourged crucified man. The image isn't made by brush strokes or rubbed on. There is no clear direction or capillary action. The image fades gradually at the edges, not like drawn or painted lines. In their summary, it says, it is not the product of an artist. It can't be, because there's no evidence that an artist did anything that an artist could do to create the image. The scientific consensus is that the image was produced by something which resulted in an oxidation, dehydration, conjugation of the polysaccharide structure of the microfibrils of the linen itself. Now, let me explain. This is how I explain it, okay? My arm. You ever looked at a piece of thread with a magnifying glass? And if you look at that piece of thread, like hold your buttons on, right? You see little hairy things, right? Those are the fibrils. The fiber is the body of the thread. The fibrils are the hairies that come up, okay? The image lies on the fibrils. The fibrils are deoxidized. There's a dehydration or an oxidation of the little hairy things, okay? What's the depth? This talks about the high, they pointed out the face with the high resolution, by the way. You see that? They pointed that out in there. They saw it and they said, and the face part we don't understand because the face seems to stand out. The bloodstains are composed of hemoglobin and also give a positive test for serum albumin. There's a high concentration of bilirubin, consistent with trauma causing the blood to turn red, okay? So there's a number of scientists, and I've heard debates where there are scientists say it's not human blood, it's not human blood. Trust me, there are scientists say it is human blood. But the point is that there's bilirubin in it. Okay, so I'm in trial, and I've got another side that's trying to argue against the shroud. And I basically say, well, if it was a forgery, that was a really smart forger artist, because he put bilirubin in that substance, whatever you want to call it, before he knew what bilirubin was. Right? I mean, if it happened in the Middle Ages, they didn't know what bilirubin was, right? So this is another one of those factual, I mean, you put the trial on, you go, this says it was not done by a human being because it's got this substance in it. Okay, this is kind of where I wanted to go to. The image lies on the superficial surface, like I said, the fibrils, and they use the word fibrils. When I first read this, the Stirp summary, I go, what's a fibril? Right? I had to look it up to figure out what it was. It's the little hairy things, right? It lies on the superficial surface of the linen cloth at a depth of 200 to 500 nanometers, or 0.2 microns. It's also described as 0.2 microns. What is that? Take one of your hairs, cut it in half twice, and that's the depth. Each color fibril is the same color all around the surface. The image is made up of individual colored lined fibers. There is no bulk color. Artists couldn't have done this in the Middle Ages, okay? The image doesn't glow under UV light, unlike heat scorches. It's not a scorch mark, because if it was, when they ran light through it, ultraviolet light, it would fluoresce, okay? So it's not that. The image doesn't wash off with common solvents, okay? So how did the artist do that? Where there is blood, there is no image beneath it. So the blood was on the cloth before the image. Crucified, died, taken to the tomb. The blood was there before because there's no image under the blood. Does that make sense? You're struggling with that a little bit?
No, I get it.
Yeah. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Right? Right? Okay. I'm putting the case on.
So you're saying that it was in contact with the blood that was on his body, but the image has not yet been made.
Yeah. Where the blood is, there's no image under the blood. So the blood was there first. Consistent with right. He was crucified, died, and then he rose. So obviously the blood would be there before he rose. Okay? Make sense? The body and image patterns match a body at rest, not moved or enwrapped. The image is in areas that did not touch the body. This is another good one. The image is in areas where, it's draped over, where there'd be blank areas where it's not touching. Like your nose, like that. The image is in areas that are not touching. That's another really significant factual piece of evidence that science is giving us, okay? The image is one uniform color. It's sepia or yellow, not multiple. Again, how does an artist do that? There's no chemical or physical methods known which can account for the totality of it, nor can any combination of physical, chemical, biological, or medical circumstances explain the image adequately. The answer to the question of how the image was produced or what produced the image remains now, as in the past, a mystery. A mystery, yes.
Can you help me understand what I'm looking at over there? I see Christ in the middle. I see the body in the middle. What am I looking at on each side?
That's the noise that I mentioned. It's been subject to fires. It's been subject to being folded for maybe hundreds of years. So there's marks and lines and areas. When I talked about fluorescing, if there was a fire and there was substance like smoke that got onto it, if you fluoresce it, it's going to light up. So that's the noise that just take your eyes and look past that. It's not relevant. It doesn't provide any relevant information at all. Okay? It's just historical from the way it's been treated and where it's been for 2,000 years. Okay? Science cannot explain how the image was formed on the linen cloth. At 0.2 microns, okay? Pollen. This is another one. This is my brother-in-law. This is what got him. We have pollen that's on it when they did some pollen tests, and the pollen shows that the pollen was from Jerusalem, Edessa, Constantinople. The pollen follows the tracking of it historically. So another piece of evidence, okay? Visual gospel, okay? Yes?
I'm struggling with the width of it. So is that traditionally they would wrap it long ways on top?
Good question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Versus wrap like how big is
Yeah. This is my bias, okay? I believe that the way they wrapped it was they took it, put the body down, and wrapped it over like that, okay? Yeah. They put the body down like that and wrapped it like that, okay? So they put it over, okay, because that makes sense. And talk to Dr. Asset about this, because he did I'll tell you what he did, but it suggests that that's the case. Father Dalton and others like to argue that it was wrapped like a mummy, which would be consistent with the Jewish burial rite. And so he wants to go with Matthew, which suggests that it was wrapped like that. Well, the problem with that is it doesn't explain what the science is telling us about it, so it kind of gets in the way. I understand where he's coming from, but quite frankly, based on what Dr. Aceta has told me from his studies, I think it's more likely to have been that way. Okay, it makes more sense from what we can see about it. Okay, so this is really important from a trial standpoint. If this thing is real, authentic, then it had to have been consistent with the Bible, right? It has to reveal what the Bible, the narrative, or the biblical story was. Is the Bible true or is the Bible not? Some people would say it's just a bunch of stories that a bunch of people made up to create some religion. Okay? Well, what if we have physical evidence that the story's true because it shows every single wound, every single thing that they did to him is on that shroud? So from an evidentiary standpoint, this is direct evidence that the Bible is true because it's physical evidence that confirms or corroborates, remember that word? Corroborates the biblical narrative, the story, right? What created the shroud image? Well, we know it wasn't paint, stains, dyes, or pigments, right? What created it? This is where it gets interesting, okay? And it gets all over the place. And there are some people that say, this gets too confusing for me. Why? Okay, remember what the Nicene Creed said? Light from light. There's some sheets back there, if you're interested, grab them, that talk about biblical references. Light, 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 light. Okay? It's all over the place, right? And it starts in Genesis. Okay? So nuclear energy, okay, can create an image. It can create an image. How do we know? Because in Hiroshima, we know that there are images of things and people on walls after the bomb hit, okay? Well, what that did was again, this has evolved, and this is the fun part for us in here, okay? Because there were all these theories about how the image was formed. Was it some sort of a coronal energy force? Was it some sort of an ultraviolet light? What was it? What was the light? Nuclear? What was it? Well, Dr. Aceta, when he had his Shroud Center in Fountain Valley, he snuck into the nuclear radiation facility at Hogue with Dr. Lyons, who was the head of nuclear radiation, who's still living, and John Jackson. Because Dr. Aceta had this theory, I think it could be a nuclear type light, and if we put a body in and do a nuclear gamma radiation study, maybe it'll look similar to what the shroud was. So Gus he injected himself with dye and went in this thing, and guess what? It showed an image that was similar. And that started a whole new discovery method to kind of explain a little bit better. We'll probably never know exactly because it kind of goes to the beatific vision that the church talks about, right? I mean, we don't know that. I mean, talk to Mary about it. Ask one of the visionaries in Medjugorje to ask her, okay? Maybe she'll tell us, right? But the point is we don't know, but we do know this. It has these properties. It has these properties that suggest that it was a form of light, okay? But this study, which was here in Orange County, which is so cool, sparked a whole bunch of studies. And the biggest thing was it started some studies in Italy by a group led by Paolo Di Lazzaro. And what they did was they started taking various spectrums of ultraviolet light, and they would point it at a piece of linen cloth to see if they could create the image in the same way, superficial. Remember, it's superficial. So if it was formed by a light, it had to have been really fast. But their conclusion, they found one form of ultraviolet light, which is vacuum ultraviolet. And what is vacuum ultraviolet? When it hits air, it disappears. So they did their computer analysis, and they came up with one explanation is that the light was the equivalent of several billion watts, high energy, at 1/40 billionth of a second. Okay, I want you to sit here for a second and think about that. Why? Because it didn't penetrate into the body of the thread. It's on the superficial surface at 2 microns. You follow? It had to have been high heat or high light radiation. Light is radiation, right? Really fast. Now, here's one of those scriptural passages. You ever read this one? There's a number of them, okay? God, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, dwells in, say it. Boom. What does that suggest? Is it rational to say he went back into the spirit? Is it rational to say that he had the ability to transfigure because he could become mechanically transparent when he was on the earth? As we know the biblical account, these accounts don't seem ridiculous anymore. They seem very, very plausible. He was, the church teaches, fully what? And fully? Exactly. He was fully God and fully man. How does that work? Somebody want to explain that to me? No, I mean, it's, right? It's remarkable. Why are we not telling this story? It's like unbelievable, right? And so it explains the transfiguration and how he was lit up and his clothes were lit up, right? It becomes white as light. He walked on water. How does he walk on water? We think he was 5'11", 170 pounds. You think maybe at 170 he would sink? Right? He became mechanically transparent. The interesting question is, how did Peter do it? That's a really interesting question, right? We don't know. But the narrative is that he did for a while, for a moment, right? Until maybe that's the whole point. Until what? He stopped believing. Remember what I said about Nikola Tesla and what he's trying to tell us? Are we so focused on what's here on this earth that we're missing things that are way bigger and better and more important out there beyond us? Maybe? Maybe? This is one of Lee's. He came up with this one. 1,203 Bible verses about seeking his face. 1,200. Face. Remember I told you about how the face stands out? Seeking his face. We're told over and over and over again, seek his face. If my people will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will forgive their sin and heal their land. For God so loved the world. Say it. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
In the face, the lips are closed, right?
Yes. Actually, there's a recent study that came out by a dentist who says he can see some teeth in there, which is a whole nother forensic interesting point.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because as far as the church talks about the face cloth, which
that's the Sudarium of Oviedo. That's that other, it's called the Sudarium of Oviedo. It was a modesty cloth that they put over the face of somebody after they died. And then that was the other cloth. Yes, it's in Oviedo, Spain.
it's in Oviedo, Spain. Okay, not Manapalo, Italy.
No, that's a different Oviedo. It's not the Veil of Veronica. The facial cloth that you're talking about was the modesty cloth that matches up to the shroud. The blood matches. There's match. That's in Oviedo, Spain.
Because the one in Manapalo does this whole shroud experience.
Well, again, when they take them down, they put a modesty cloth over their face so people don't have to see it, right? And that's the other cloth. Remember, there were cloths with an S. So that's the other cloth.
Okay.
Yes.
One thing that we didn't talk about, which you talked about at the center, was the scourging marks. Now, who else would have all those? You know what I mean?
Well, no, they didn't scourge people before they put them on the cross.
Yeah, but
No, that's just another example. I mean, it just goes, keep in mind, and I've always said this, and I've told this to Lee, if it's real, and to people, if it's real, then it has to have a connection, right? That's the question that I would ask myself early on when I'm going, is this thing real? And the more I studied it and the more I understood it as a lawyer and as a judge, I'm going, the evidence is ridiculous. You know, and then we have all these scientific articles, and they'll take a shot at this, they'll take a shot at that. These little questions, right? The evidence, forget all of that. The preponderance of the evidence says it's probably more likely than not. We'll never know for sure. We won't have a for certainty, but that's what people want these days. They want science to tell them the certainty of it. Well, guess what science did for us with the carbon dating? They confused us, right? So, I mean, it's common sense. It's just, what is this and what does it mean?
One thing that's similar from a heavenly object would be the fact that Guadalupe's image is not in the fibers.
Right.
It's on top. So
The
NASA's-
properties are not the same.
Right, but saying that the
By the way,
scientists
she
have not
didn't-
come up to it.
She didn't rise from the dead in a 1/40 of a second.
Of course not.
With a nuclear type light.
But the science hasn't caught up to the Shroud and hasn't caught up to Guadalupe. Our science is not.
They haven't done the same studies on Guadalupe that they've done on the Shroud. I mean, the Shroud has been studied more than anything out ever. I mean, there's so many articles out there, like on academia, just so many.
Science hasn't caught up to it.
Science cannot explain it.
No.
They can't explain it. That's the point. They can't duplicate it. Nobody's been able to duplicate it. They said it's a rub mark that was done at a pageant in the 15th century. Okay, well then redo it.
Yeah.
Redo it with all the same properties. Remember, 1/40 billionth, it's 0.2 microns on the fibrils, not the fibers. I mean,
The books you talked about in the presentation, are they in academia.com?
the books, no. Academia's articles. The books, there's some great books out. Go to shroud.com. And we have some good books on our website too, on shroudcenter.com. But I think shroud.com is going to give you some of the better works. Russ Breault, B-R-E-A-U-L-T, Breault, he's got a really good book called The Shroud Encounter. It's fairly recent.
No, I think this is the first time I understood that the image was on the fibrils, because for some reason, I thought that, the image came from his dried blood on the actual fabric itself.
It's
Exactly.
the fibrils are discolored, but they're discolored the same way everywhere. It all happened at the same time. And it even happened in areas where the cloth wasn't touching the body.
Yeah. That's why when you said, okay, there's no image under the blood, it took a minute for my mind to kind of process that.
Right,
Okay.
right. Yes.
There is, I'm sorry. There's another really excellent book written by Dr. Gilbert Lavoie, Lavoie. He is also a doctor, and he, goes through all of the different elements, the pollen, the blood, the scourging, and all of those different elements, and just wanted to recommend it.
And by the way, there's way more. I mean, I wanted to do this in an hour. I think I was successful, but there's so much more we could talk about. I just wanted to hit the highlights.
Yeah, 2 points that I saw on a documentary was that the scientists confirmed the body showed the known trauma from a first century Roman crucifixion, but there's no evidence anywhere that any other crucified person
Had a crown
had
of
a crown of
thorns.
thorns.
Oh.
No, I mean,
that was
That's a good
unique
point.
to what they
No, no,
did to
they-
Jesus to mock him as king of the Jews.
right. The uniqueness of the gospel narrative as to how they crucified this person is another piece of the evidence. It's another part of how the evidence points to its authenticity. And then people say, well, how come the church hasn't declared? Because it's a relic, and the church doesn't do that. The church is focused on theology and doctrine and teaching and all of that kind of stuff. This presents kind of a little bit of a dilemma. It's a physical object. It's not that complicated. It's a physical object with all of this evidence that points to authenticity. So, we don't need the church to make a declaration. But I'm certainly not afraid to say the evidence is pretty overwhelming.
So, Your Honor, another question I have about the fold over is because the image is in the middle of it, correct?
Yeah.
So, wouldn't you expect the image to be on the side until it's
No.
folded over?
Here's how they folded it, okay? And this is a good one. I don't want to get too far into the weeds with some of this, but in Edessa, they refer to this thing called the mandilium, okay? And it's confusing because mandilium refers to a kerchief, Okay? But Ian Wilson and others have said, I think it might have been the shroud. Why would it be? Because what they would have done is they would have folded it like this over, right? See that? Then they would have folded it in half, and then they would have folded it again, and on the top would have been the face. That's the way Ian Wilson describes it, as well as others, okay? So that's just another one of those we're not completely sure. But the story of it being in Edessa, and there's a letter from Jesus to King Edessa that's in the historical record. People say it wasn't real, but it's part of this story about this emissary coming to Jesus and asking Jesus to go to Edessa to heal his king who was ill. And Jesus said, my time is near, I can't, but after I'm gone, I will send somebody to heal him. Then the story is that Thaddeus took the shroud up, or maybe something else, but he took it up to Edessa and the king was healed. And then all of a sudden Christianity kind of took off in Edessa. So again, there's references to this, like the doctrine of a die, but it's not like direct statements about it. You kind of have to understand what it's trying to say to kind of piece it together, because we don't have all of the full details. Which doesn't mean it's not valid. Doesn't. It just means that the story is a little bit more difficult to put it all together, right? Anything else? Is it time to maybe have a social hour?
I think it is. One or two more if you'd like, and then you're going to be here for a while, right?
Yeah, I'll be here for a while.
Have they done any DNA analysis on it?
The DNA is probably not going to happen. The DNA is just not something that's what's the word? It's not in the kind of condition that they could really do that. That's a really good question. It's just corrupted to the point where the DNA just isn't. And maybe that's on purpose. I don't know. But that's a common question. Anything else? Okay, so now what are you going to do with this? Right? See that image? That's a person. That's not a doctrine. It's not a dogma. It's not a teaching. That's a person. That's the person you want to get to know. So he asks this question, who do you say I am? But ultimately the bottom line is, do you believe or not? Do you have faith or not? That's ultimately what it comes down to. But I can tell you this right for sure, that face stands out for a reason. Okay?
Amen.
You're welcome.